Okay, so the next question, if you're a woman who took a break from your career for family reasons, would you go back at some point to the same industry, do something different outside the home, or not go back at all? I wish I could also participate in
Yeah,
this.
I wish I could have too. But put down
Unfortunately,
your answer. It'll be interesting to
yes,
discuss
yes,
it.
definitely.
Wow. Okay. Encouraging. Very nice.
That's great. We have more or less the same amount of people
Yeah,
wanting
wanting
to
to go
go
out.
back. Yeah,
Which means, guys, you've got to reduce the bias at the workplace.
right. Absolutely.
I'm just kidding.
Okay. I think we can move on. We can move on to the next question. So we have 56% people who want to go back to the same industry, 44% women who want to do something outside, and very happily that 0% people are saying they don't want to go back at all. So that's great.
Nice. Nice.
Okay, and the final question is that if you're a man, do you participate with your wife or partner in home care activities like cooking, cleaning, childcare? Is it always, is it sometimes, or rarely, or never? Those are the three options.
We have many honest people. At least one. Again, that's a joke. Nice. This was a nice question also. I think that's it.
So
We have
results,
13 men.
I think we can, yeah. So results are very promising. We have men helping their wives or partners 62% of the times. Some of them are only helping 31%, and we only see 8% people rarely or never helping their partners. So that was a very interesting poll question. Okay, I think we can stop this poll now. All right. Okay. So now that we are done with the polls, let me welcome everyone again to Ahmedabad University and to the Conversation Series. The Conversation Series is a string of webinars at Ahmedabad University. Our university is a research university, and we believe in a different kind of education. We believe that there should be scintillating discussions on topics of relevance. Ideas should come from all over the place, and it should not just remain within the boundaries of our university. And that's why we invite deep thinkers from different walks of life with whom we love to connect and have thought-provoking conversations. We've had an amazing lineup of thought leaders, academics, and practitioners on this platform. And that brings me to today's speaker, Hema Hatangi. It is my privilege to introduce her. So a little bit about Hema. She did her post-graduation in management from the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata, 1987. She started her career as client service executive at Bangalore advertising firm Advit India. She became the general manager in 2 years, heading New Delhi and Bangalore branches. In 1990, she joined the family business called Inorcus Systems and later Conserve Systems. It was a pioneer in electronic voltage stabilizers and digital meters. In October 1996, Hema was made the managing director and the CEO. She was responsible for transforming the company and putting it on a new trajectory of growth in sales and profits. Harvard Business School has written a case study, Hema Hatangi and Conserve. This was taught at its advanced management program. The case is also taught annually by Professor J.B. Kasarjian on the last day of the 2-year MBA program in entrepreneurship at Babson College, USA. This case describes the innovation, marketing, culture building, strategy, HR, ethics, and market leadership of the company. Hema was also selected as one of the 10 women who have contributed meaningfully to the power sector. The nomination was by Powerline, a premier Indian publication in the power sector. Conserve My Campus, a unique program to teach energy efficiency to children in middle school, was Hema's brainchild. And it was started in 15 schools in Delhi and Bangalore. The program created 1,600 green ambassadors and taught children to reduce their home electricity bills by 15 to 50%. The program has now been expanded by Schneider Electric under the name Conserve My Planet. Alongside, Hema also mentors women entrepreneurs and women leaders and coaches startup entrepreneurs and leaders of nonprofits. So we welcome you, Hema, to Ahmedabad University and the Conversation series.
Thank you, Maumita. Thank you, everyone. Great to be here.
Thank you. In conversation with Hema is Professor Ravi Miglani. Ravi has 35 years of experience in the field of marketing research and consumer insights and has worked across the domain, including market research, consumer behavior, customer engagement, and research-based marketing consulting. He completed his postgraduate program in management from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad in 1983. He began his research career with Kantar TNS as research manager. He went on to become the managing director of Kantar TNS North Africa. He then worked in other global marketing research and consulting firms like Frost & Sullivan and Cadence. He has worked across several countries in the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia before returning to India and joining Ahmedabad University. Professor Miglani brings long and valuable experience in advertising multinational organizations on marketing strategy based on innovative consumer research. He has presented papers at European Society for Opinion and Marketing Research conferences and has published various articles in its journal and in the MR's research magazine. So before I give it over to Ravi to start, just to highlight a couple of the rules. Everyone will be muted for the duration of the conversation, except for our speakers, of course. We will request you to put your questions and comments in the chat box. We will take all of these questions, curate them, and at the end of the conversation around 5 o'clock, we will request our speakers to address them. And lastly, I would request everyone to rename your Zoom ID to your real name and not the name of your device so that we know who's asking these questions. So again, thank you everyone for joining. This is from my side and I'll hand it over to Ravi now.
Thank you, Maumita, and welcome again, Hemaji, for finding the time to do this. Much appreciated. As we were discussing offline, while we have only about an hour to discuss today, but at some stage we hope to get you to our university and continue the conversation in much more detail, because what your story is very meaningful for our students, and we would want more of our students to listen to you. So, so there's a lot to discuss, but to begin with, we've mentioned the name Conserve, and probably not everyone in the audience might be familiar with what it is. So can you brief our audience on what is the Conserve story, where did it come from, and the history leading up to you becoming the CEO of that organization?
Sure, Raviji. Thank you for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to members of a research university. Always a pleasure to engage. Well, actually, I married into the family that set up Conserve, as Maumita alluded briefly. And my husband's family and my family had known each other from before we were born. So we had gone to Sunday school together. We would go to Konkani Association picnics together. In fact, when I was 6 and my husband was 7, we even did a play on the stage called The Wedding of a Painted Doll. He was the bridegroom, I was the bride. So, our bonds go back a long way. And we got married when we were fairly young. I was 21 and Ashok was 22. And at the time, both of us had just finished our basic graduation with our bachelor degrees. Ashok then went on to the US to do his MS in electrical engineering. He had gotten admission into the University of Texas at Austin. And I was very lucky because the family wanted me to go as well. I applied, got into an MBA at the same university. And then the Consul General of the US in India decided that since Ashok was already there, and if I went, we may never come back, we might raise a family. I didn't get my visa. So I was stranded here, and all of this had happened, just 3 months after we had got married. So I was again very fortunate because my in-laws decided there's no point in my sitting at home when I did have the capability to do an MBA. So they encouraged me to take the CAT exam in India. And they said, eventually with the family planning to set up a business, it would be nice if you studied something that was relevant to India. So I got through the CAT, got into IIM Calcutta, and by the time Ashok finished his MS, I did my MBA, and he came back and joined the business that his father had set up. So that was called at the time Enercon. It later became Conserve. And I wanted to sort of be in advertising and marketing for a while because that was really my core interest, which I was doing until the family business started growing. Now, I must tell you a little bit about Ashok's dad, H. Vasant Rao. He was an absolutely venerated engineer, a scientist, and inventor. And most of his life, he had worked at the Telecom Research Circle. Was with the Department of Post and Telegraph as an inventor, and he had lots of patents to his credit. And then he did something that was very unusual, especially for those times. I'm talking about the late 70s, early to mid 80s. He decided to take premature retirement from the government and become an entrepreneur. Today everybody talks about startup stories, but for someone who had been at a senior position where he was doing well, he had been posted by the UN to Africa, all of that, to chuck it up and say, I'm going to create a business that's going to help industries in this country to save energy. We're talking about the mid 80s. That was an absolutely visionary move. So we started out making digital energy meters and before that voltage stabilizers because the quality of power in India was pathetic. Now, we sometimes we moan about it, but in the 80s, there was harmonics, there was voltage and frequency fluctuations, and the products that we were making really started doing very well. The only catch was that my father-in-law decided that as engineers, he and his son would focus only on design and manufacturing and leave the business of marketing and sales to a bunch of his nephews who had set up a family business in construction and then created an electronics division. Now, all was hunky dory for a while, family relationships were good, the nephews were selling. But what had happened was we had given them two things. One is, and this is a lesson for all of you out there who are an enterprise or plan to set up your own enterprise, we had given away the branding rights to the marketing agency. So, although we made fantastic products, nobody knew who we were, nobody knew our company name we didn't have a brand. It was the marketing agency's brand. The second thing was they were a sole selling agent of ours, which meant that even if they didn't do well in sales numbers, we also didn't have any recourse to terminating them and saying, you are not doing good enough, we want to go to somebody else. So it was, over time, this relationship became very prickly. And when I entered the business, I, finished my MBA. I had all this language of contracts and structure, strategic frameworks, and all that. And I started looking at the a little deeper at the relationship, at the agreement. What was going wrong? We were cash starved all the time. We had to depend on bank loans. We had borrowed quite heavily to expand the design team, to set up a manufacturing facility, etc. And we didn't have cash. So at the same time, the agents came and said that they would like, in fact, they started hounding my father-in-law and said, we want to acquire you. We're going to merge you with us because we've now become very big. And, you're a small family of four. So you can all become employees with us. So I was sitting there and listening to this conversation. Remember, I was very much, on the periphery. I was doing odd jobs. I didn't have shareholding. I was helping out. And I found this conversation very intriguing. I said, Arey, bhai, we have the IP, we have the designs, we have given you the products with which you've built your brand. So how can you force us to merge with you or else, And I didn't want the family to go ahead with this at all. So I became the villain of the piece at the time. And the nephew's agency got extremely irritated and told my father-in-law, look, if because of Hema, you guys are not going to agree, we've had enough. We can import products and become your competitors. And they literally terminated the agency agreement overnight. In fact, they went back to Chennai. In those days, we had a fax machine. I think today you'll find a fax machine only in a museum. But they faxed us a termination letter of the agency agreement and said, okay, from tomorrow you're on your own. So that is the time at which we discovered that We obviously didn't have any reserves, but we had lots of product plans. We had many things on the drawing board, but nobody knew us in the marketplace. And we had bank loans to pay, and we had employee wages to pay. So, being a family of extremely high principles, and I'm glad that my father-in-law took that decision. Whatever little money we had, we continued paying off loans, we continued paying salaries. But as members of the family, the four of us didn't take a single rupee in salaries and lived off our savings for 6 months. And I think, when you look around today, you read the headlines in financial papers, you see a lot of promoters' families are not doing exactly that. So I'm quite proud of the pain, of course, we went through was difficult, but very proud of that choice that we made at the time to be true to the lenders who had supported us and to our employees who didn't obviously have deep pockets. So around the time, in fact, it happened at exactly the same moment. So sometimes I feel, a guardian angel must have been looking down for us, looking out for us, because T. Thomas, who was the chairman of Hindustan Lever in India, and then went on to get on the board of Unilever worldwide. He was in London for 10 years. He retired and came back to India and set up at an age when most people would retire at 69. He set up India's first private venture capital fund. There was already a public sector one called TDICI, but he created Indus Venture, and as luck would have it, he sent his senior vice president out looking for uh, businesses that they could invest in. And they came across this nephew's agency in Chennai and asked them, "What are you doing? You're talking about energy management and so on. So, what's the product?" So the nephew said, we had this arrangement, but when we wanted to acquire them, they said no. So now we are going to buy products from Europe and we are going to compete with my uncle. So Mr. Thomas heard the story and said, "Hey, this is not fair. You guys grew into fat cats based on your uncle's technology, and now you've dumped them and you're going to compete with them." So he got our address from them and came looking for us. And I still remember the night when at dinner, my father in law told us, "Do you know who walked into our office today?" It was the representative of T. Thomas. And I almost choked because I realized that this is the man whose company, Hindustan Lever, we were studying about at IIM. And here he was, asking if he could help us out because we were up the creek without a paddle, as they say. So we were lucky because he valued our IP and gave us a premium and put in money and took a stake. But what happened was, as we were trying to grow in R&D and marketing, he had to invest more and more. And what happens when you invest more and more? There is dilution. And so the family stake came down from 100% to 25% over the space of 4 years. And at which point my father-in-law had already become quite tired of the operations, and he asked Ashok, who was the eldest son, to become the managing director. Ashok was miserable right at the start. He said, "Wait, I'm, a designer. I have been designing products. I don't really want to run the business," but there was no choice. After all, we're a family business. And that was the year I was at home, just had my baby, and I was very keen to be a stay-at-home mom. And Ashok would come home every single day and say, "Today I had a problem with a labor guy. Tomorrow the customs chaps are coming," and I'm beginning to get increasingly frustrated. And I would give him answers. I'd say, "But this is such a simple problem to solve. Why didn't you do this?" And after a year, when my son had grown a little older, he asked me, "Hema, why don't you become, the head of the business? Because when our agency dumped us, you've already learnt about the products, about electrical engineering. You used to go and sell the products." And he went straight to Mr. Thomas and said, "Why don't you make my wife the CEO? Because then I can do what I'm good at. And she seems to know what she's talking about." So that was a very interesting moment in our life. And this is where I'll stop this story, Ravi, because you asked me, how did I become the CEO? Mr. Thomas turned around to Ashok and said, "I didn't want to say it because I'm the venture capitalist, but among the four of you, I felt that perhaps with her IIM degree and with her business acumen, perhaps she would make a better CEO, but it's for the family to decide." Given the way we were financially, we didn't have a choice. So I was made the MD. So I had a 15-month-old son. I had to take over a business which I didn't understand much about, not the technical part anyway. And there was a carry forward loss which had wiped out the net worth and so on. Challenging times. And at the first board meeting where the board resolution was passed, Mr. Thomas looked at me and said, I said, what do I do? What's my mandate? He looked at me like, that was a very silly question. And he said, make the company profitable and make it professional. So that 6-word mandate was what I had to start off with in mid 96. And that's the story of how I came to be the CEO.
Thank you so much. That was so inspiring. I'm sure many young people in the audience would love that story of how you went the whole roller coaster up and completely down and then back up again and so on. So there's lots of lessons there on how not to despair, not to give up at in bad times. Things will turn around. So you are the CEO then, and then a few things which struck me when reading your book and reading other things about your life. And by the way, this is the book we're talking about, which we also see behind Hemaji. So this is a memoir, autobiography, a kind of a story, life story on and life lessons. So it's not just a life story, but life lessons more importantly. So a couple of things I'll pick up on before we get to the main theme of the day. So one thing which, as you said in those 6 words of Mr. Thomas, professional and profitable, and you took professional to the extreme. You set out building an ethical organization, as you call it, inside out. And inside, I think, and from my little experience, inside is relatively easy, but the outside world is beyond your control. Usually your suppliers, your customers, the regulators, the government. And in a country which we all joke about endemic corruption everywhere in the country, in the private sector and the public sector, you followed a zero tolerance policy on corruption. And many would say that that's impossible. You were just chasing a dream. It could never happen, but you made it happen. Can you briefly tell us about that? How did you make your organization a zero tolerance to corruption organization? And was the pain worth it?
Well, nice. Let me start by saying that, the second part of your question, it was never a choice. It was just the way we wanted to be. I think that was a very good starting point that Mr. Thomas, Ashok, and I, who by then the three of us were the investors, we were very clear that we either do business in a clean manner or not at all. That was the choice. It was binary. And it was very important for us that we showed by example. It was not enough to, preach from a podium. This kind of thing about integrity is not something that you type up in a rule book and hand out copies and put posters and ask people to read it as they walk by, right? It's something that you have to live. So coming to I think, how did I do it? What were the challenges? I've, thought of a few things that really stuck out from all those years ago. The first thing was that rather like in parenting, where you have to show by example, you don't tell your kid, don't smoke, and then you go into a dark little corner and huff on a cigarette or whatever. You don't do that, right? Because that's what your kid will learn. So similarly, in creating a zero tolerance company, we had to show that we meant it. And how do you do that? So if you've told your salespeople, by बिल्कुल bribe नहीं देना है, and then target when it comes to the quarterly review, they're presenting their target achievement, and one of them says, I had to give up this big XYZ public sector order. It would have brought me very close to my target, but I couldn't do it because the guy was asking for a bribe. But if you say, listen, I don't want to hear about all that, we just want performance. Our sales, our business plan. If you do that kind of thing, what is the message you're giving? You're saying that I only mean I'm doing lip service. I want to hear myself say, let's be honest. But when the rubber hits the road, and when your person is frankly telling you that there was corruption, you are saying, I don't care what, go get the business. So that's one thing we did not do, which meant a lot of hard work for people like Ashok and me and my finance head. We actually had to get into the details. Why did you give this up? Who are those people? Let me talk to somebody at the top. And that's where we learned a lot of lessons. Lesson number one, Not every organization is corrupt. Not every person in an organization is corrupt. Number three, if you go right up to the top, somewhere you will find somebody who cares enough about the values of that company and the bottom line of that company. Because remember, if there is a corrupt officer, it's costing that buyer company the money, right? Because he's padding up the price. So we taught our people this third lesson, that go high enough, use whatever networks you have, or come to us, we'll take you to the top till we find somebody who's wanting our meters badly enough to do it without any bribery. In fact, I'd love to share the story if I may. I don't want to name any department, but there was one government department which is known in India even today. I mean, it's almost like an acronym for corruption. And there was a massive project because of Commonwealth Games or something coming up. There was a massive project in which this department was involved, and all eyes of competitors and of Conserve were on getting that big prize of that stadium project and the lighting and all of that, because we wanted our meters there. But what happened was, after going through the technical specification and approval with the consultants phase, we cleared everything. When it came to the commercial phase also, we cleared the pricing. But finally, we discovered, our sales guy in Delhi said, "Nahi, there is this massive question of a very large bribe." So we said, it's not large or small. If there's a bribe, then we don't do it. So we gave that up. And a few weeks later, I was traveling to Cochin to address a bunch of students in an engineering college. And the young lady who came to receive me at the airport, I was chatting with her in the car. I said, what do you do? What does your dad do? What does your mom do? And she said, my dad is in so and so department in Delhi. And it turned out to be the same department where we had been trying to get the order. I said, really? He works there and he's your dad? And I did some mental math. This girl seems really sweet. She looks like she's from a good family. Her dad can't be corrupt. So I said, would you mind, if you don't think it's very outrageously audacious of me, can you connect me to your dad? I just want to say hello and ask him something. So she connected me to her dad, and I introduced myself and told him, I want to give your organization the best meters in the country. They're so accurate, you will save energy, you will know exactly how much you're consuming, but I can't sell to you. So he said, why? So I told him the reason. He said, just give me 48 hours and come back to me. I quickly called my regional manager and I said, go now, meet this man, and he will help you. And we got that order. And I think the lesson was not so much about my quick thinking or my reaching out, but the salespeople realized there is always a way if you decide to do something. And when your boss, that's me, has already told you that I don't mind losing the order, then you have to give it all you've got, right? Because at least that guilt has to make you want to do something in a clean way. So had to go through a lot of these kind of stories, but I think the telling and the sharing of examples, what did we do when we were faced with the roadblock? We had value sharing sessions at our induction meet, at our appraisal meets, at our review meets. Every chance we got, we would ask people to tell the good and bad, where did it work, where did it not work. So everybody had an idea of what was going on. The other thing that we had to keep checking, Raviji, was that we had to make sure there was alignment as new people joined the organization. It's okay when you've grown old together, it's like a family or a husband and wife, but as new people join, especially at senior positions, if there was a misalignment which came out later, we just simply had to part ways. Now, that was another big cost, right? It would have been so much easier to say, "Theek hai, we've spent so much money on hiring, training, development. This guy or this woman has just settled down. Why should we, why don't we just try and do coaching?" But I've discovered one thing: if there is lack of basic integrity, it's not coachable. You can't coach it out of a person, right? It's just the way a person is. And then thirdly, I think we also have to have the courage and the resilience as a business to say no. It's okay to say no to orders, but is the bottom line, is the company's financial position good enough to take that? Because if you're going to go under and all your employees are going to go down with you, then you have to think long and hard. But fortunately, we had made sure that our cash position was always under watch. We were solid there, and our profitability was good. That gave us the courage to do what we were doing. And also, I just want to share two quick stories with you, if I think we do have the time. And I think this is an important topic. Can I just share
Yes.
another? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure, certainly.
So, one story is about, since you talked specifically about external world, right? How do you deal with the government? How do you deal with... So we had this assistant commissioner of sales tax, a woman, who is refusing to assess our file. So if the file comes up for assessment and she doesn't take it up, then you can't file your returns, and then you get into penalty and all of that for no fault of ours. So the commercial guy, my colleague, came and told me that, ma'am, whatever I do, this lady is refusing to take up a file now. 10 years sales tax is pending for assessment. And if she does decide to take it up, then there will be a penalty, and nobody will say that it was because she delayed it. What should I do? I said, keep going every day and document what you're doing. One day he came back and said, it's now reached a point of no return. So I said, what happened? So he says this lady punched in some numbers on a calculator and she held it up, wondering whether this guy might be recording her. So she had put in a bribe figure on the calculator and she was holding it up. Apparently, this is what she did at this stage. So this guy just came running out and told me, now what do I do? So I said, nothing. We don't pay. Let's go to who's the topmost person in this department. So he said, that's a commissioner. So I said, let's go and meet the commissioner. So we went, and I was told that the commissioner would give me 7 minutes of his time. I said, wow, that's very generous. Let's do it. So I walked in and he said, are you willing to give a written complaint? So, because he knew exactly who I was talking about. And I said, yes, why should I worry? So he said, Acha, obviously you don't know, but she has protection from the top. So I said, I don't care. In fact, all the more reason for me to do it. So he said, no one has ever done it before. Are you sure? I said, give me the paper, please, and I will write it out. So I wrote out the details, gave it to him in front of me, picked up the phone, called his boss in Delhi and said, sir, we have finally got our first written complaint. And I'm sitting there thinking, have I been brave or foolish? And then he says, okay, Sarji, he puts down the phone, tells me, your file is going to be moved tomorrow. You won't have to deal with her anymore. And then we will, what we do with her is none of your business anyway. So I went out, and sure enough, file was transferred. But there is a twist in the tale. At the end, many years later, when we moved our factory to a new facility in Electronic City, our circle moved, the sales tax circle. And guess who was the boss there? It was the same lady. But she apparently, I don't know, I won't use the word scared, must have learned her lesson. When my colleague again went and they passed each other in the corridor, she averted her eyes and walked down. We never had a problem. And when my colleague walked into this new office, they stood up and greeted him and said, Acha, aap conserve se ho. This whole rumor and story had spread that we had dared to stand up against someone who thought she was infallible. So that was one story about the external world and the government. And then I had this horrendous experience where, when I was traveling in Baroda once, I was with my area manager and I was waxing eloquent, हमने अभी 3 साल का business plan किया है, what are we going to do, etc. What are you doing? So he said, listen, ma'am, just hold your horses. I have to tell you something. He said, you think we are running an honest company? You've just given us a lot of bhashan about integrity. But you don't know that all your regional managers are accepting kickbacks from dealers to route the most lucrative orders to them. So I said, can't be true. He said, why don't you call XYZ in the other areas and check? So I did that while I was with him. And then I discovered it was true. And the bottom fell out of my world. So I called my chairman in Bombay and I said, what do I do? So he said, that's very simple, right? You just fire them all. So I said, but how do I do that? What will happen to our business plan? He said, what will happen if you don't fire them all? And so I actually had to do it in the next 48 hours. I flew to the different cities and gave them their termination letters. Of course, we did an investigation and documented it on paper. And we got in a new team. But the thing that happened, although we had a bit of a gap in our performance, the message that went to dealers and to our sales team was, you can't get away. You can't get away with corruption in this company. So that helped to attract a whole new bunch of people. And that's how we soldiered on.
My God, there are so many lessons in there. So I would not repeat those. I'm sure our audience are picking up on those, especially our student audience, because there's so much there for any businesses you would later start or join. So, I mean, one word is bravery. To be brave, to dare. Once, if you're convinced that you are on the side of the right, there's nothing can stop you. There will be short-term setbacks. You might lose an order there, and you might lose a star performer employee there because they missed their target because of these policies. You'll lose few people, you'll lose few orders, but in the long term, if you stay on track, it all pays off. So just one other theme before we get to our main topic. One other theme that you emphasize throughout your career and emphasize a lot in your book is about giving equal or maybe even more than equal importance to human capital, to relationships, to staff, to caring. You say somewhere that your management style was fiercely demanding and deeply caring, which on the face of it looks like an kind of an oxymoron. It looks like a contradiction in terms that, I mean, I've been in many organizations and we always are taught that customer is king, that everyone has to run around in circles around the customer, and employees are just tools in servicing customers, and employees don't matter, customers matter, revenue matters, business matters, employees are just resources, and we call them human resources, which is a different topic. I find that a very demeaning term. They're not machines. And anyway, so this philosophy that you can be fiercely demanding and yet be deeply caring, how do you manage that? Because most organizations I know either err on too much on the side of caring and then kind of lose business, or too much on the side of demanding, and employee attrition starts and they start losing people because people don't feel cared for enough. So how did you manage that very precarious balance? I'm sorry, a fire alarm keeps going off in my office, so hopefully I'll not have to run out, but
Oh,
I'll go on
okay.
mute.
I hope you're safe. Yeah. So let me answer that in two parts, Raviji. So firstly, I must admit in all honesty and candor that it was only through making a lot of missteps and mistakes that I discovered that if your people are happy, they will want to live by your value system and also want to make your customers happy. You know, to your point that people, employers usually use human resources as tools. So obviously, I started out with that approach, saying customer is king, customer delight, all of that. But at some point, and I won't go into that today, it's a topic for another day, when I had a personal epiphany, I realized this, that people are happy, they make customers happy. So I think it was about looking for not just the customer, or I'm sorry, the employee engagement, but we used a word that had become quite popular at the time, and that is called enmeshment, that the employee has to feel enmeshed with the company, assimilated with the company. And he or she has to feel, if I get an order, doesn't matter which department, if the company has secured an order with great difficulty against competition and it's a prestigious thing, everyone should feel happy. And if you've lost it, everyone should feel the pain. And if not, then why are we here? So I think that culture we developed through a series of steps that we took, which I've explained in the book. And also, very soon, when people are aligned, they get fulfillment from being inside the company. And it's what my HR mentor has called a psychological contract with the company that goes way beyond the employment contract. It essentially defines what I was saying, feeling one with the company. But we didn't always get it right. It didn't mean that just because we were doing this, our attrition was low. Far from it. For several different reasons, whether it was to adhere to our code of conduct or because there's competitive pressure from the outside, attrition rates were, typically very high for a company. And that was one more challenge I had to deal with. But I designed some unique HR tools, which are extremely simple, pencil to paper kind of tools. Two tools which I designed and two which I borrowed from large multinationals, because I felt these tools would help me get the emotional pulse of the person working with us. If you know what's going on in their heart and mind, not soul, but heart and mind, then you know, are they assimilated? Are they feeling comfortable in their own skin? Are they putting on a face for us? Are we making them be somebody they are not? And when you make people be who they are not, it doesn't last, right? It's like a mask cracks. And with this tool, one of them is called the ELF tool, which is the emotional learning and financial value add. I was inspired by what they do at Infosys, but I created a metric around that, which was very simple to fill. And by looking at it, I trained my colleagues to predict whether this person would last with us or whether we would have to part ways. So that's just a little bit to tell you what we were doing to make sure that people were comfortable with us. But I think a bigger question that you asked was the balance between being fiercely demanding and deeply caring. So I have to give you a little bit of background. Firstly, innovation and R&D and excellence in design and manufacturing were really the cornerstones of our business and the engines of our growth. So the quality of the product gave our people the confidence to go out to sell and support the customers. And the market was getting more and more competitive because energy meters, digital products, suddenly everybody wanted it because the cost of energy was rising high. And that's why my father-in-law had created this business. And they were like, a swarm of bees. Competition was from abroad, competition was from the unorganized sector. So we had to make sure that we couldn't fall asleep at the wheel. And we had learned that the hard way, that when you get complacent, bad things happen. So in essence, we had built up a core that we have to excel in what we do. So that came to the fiercely demanding part. Our systems and processes were designed around TQM. I used to lead benchmarking visits to huge companies and very tiny companies, engineering companies, companies in the hospitality sector, because we had one motto: you can learn from anywhere and you can learn from anybody. So the anybody even led us to bring the children of our employees to our meetings, and we would ask them to rate us on how we were behaving. Were we adhering to our own code of conduct? Were we making sense to them? And when it came to learning from any other company, we would go to TVS, to Wipro, to Infosys. We were in the heart of Electronic City, so we had all these companies around us, and we learned TQM. We were fanatical about documenting. What we call the ISO, a lot of people call the ISO 9000 as a, it's a standard, right? And they have a very elaborate way of defining why you do it. But I had boiled it down to a very simple thing, because I discovered that our people would sit and write up documents the night before the auditor was coming. So I said, that's not what the intention was, right? So I said, it's as simple as this: we document what we do, and whatever we doing what we document and documenting what we do. That's what how we defined it. And we were very, very focused on root cause analysis, focus on preventive measures, non-recurrence of defects, closing the loop on every issue. So we tried to build a culture of excellence with little tolerance for repeated mistakes. So this is the demanding bit. But to balance that, what did we do? We didn't, like you said, didn't treat our people as human resources. We believed that they were an essential part of our business. So we created a code of conduct, something that would align all the people from top to bottom around the values and around the systems and processes that we had. So we had a code of conduct called IPACT, where it was integrity, professionalism, active listening. C was for caring and compassion. And I think and T was for teamwork. But the C became the cornerstone of why we were called fiercely demanding and deeply caring. Because when people went through bad times or the company was not doing well because of external economic factors, say there was a downturn or something, we went out of the way to be there for our people. In fact, when we moved to our new factory, a dealer from Madurai, he walked around our new facility and he was pretty amazed. And he said he didn't talk about the infrastructure or the manufacturing, the hardware of the factory. He said, "Your people are very lucky." So I said, "Why is that?" He says, "From what I hear you say and the care in your voice and in your systems, your people seem to know that if anything were to happen to them or to their families, they know they have a safety net." And for a moment, I thought, what a lovely thing to say, because we don't go around telling people, I am your safety net, right? But it's something that people have experienced and people believe. And that feeds into their desire to do more. The reason I'm, making a big point about this, I've sat on the boards of some very large listed companies, and I have seen the ruthlessness with which they are forced to lay off people. In fact, I know one company which had to lay off, not had to, they laid off 50 to 75% of their top to middle management staff in the first wave of COVID. These people had EMIs to pay, they had massive loans, they were mid career, so they had elderly parents, they had children for whose education they may have taken loans. And you give them 3 months notice and tell them, sorry, there's COVID, we don't know when we'll open the factory again, we are laying you off. That was something we could never do. And we were a small company when you compare yourself with giants like that. And we lost an employee in the tsunami, and he was at the epicenter in Indonesia when the wave struck. And when we heard that he had died, I asked Mr. Thomas, what would Unilever do? And he called up the chairman, MK Sharma, and he said, MK, what would you have done? And whatever he said, we did. And the beauty of it is, when we were selling to Schneider, I gave them a list of people whose families we were supporting, widows whose pension we were giving, NGOs to whom we had made long commitments. And we told Schneider, promise us that this becomes part of the conditions subsequent of the agreement of sale. And till today, for a fact, 12 years after I have sold the business, I can tell you all that Schneider is still adhering to that commitment they made to widow pensions, etc. So I think, in a nutshell, I think that should tell you what we meant by deeply caring.
Yeah, that is a balance I have not honestly seen in the many organizations I've interacted with or worked in, of being demanding and almost ruthless in your aims and meeting goals, and while remaining caring and compassionate. Amazing. So let's get on to, since we are short on time, let's get on to
Yeah.
the topic that we have promised our audience. So they get unka paisa vasool hona chahiye, so we give them some discussion on that topic, certainly.
Sure.
So I'll jump straight into, without any preamble, to a very, very unfair question. We've been doing this conversation series for a couple of years, and I would never have had to ask this question to a male guest in our webinars. So it's an unfair question, but I'm sure you've been asked this question hundreds of times. So here goes. How do you manage a work-life balance? It's unfair to ask you, but how do you run a family and an organization at the same time? And there will be many budding female leaders in our audience. What do they need to keep in mind, when getting into a role like yours?
Sure. I noticed that we are 10 to 5, so I'll answer this, and then I want to talk a little bit about what I see happening overseas as opposed to India. I want to come back to that because I think it gives us some perspective. So thank you for asking that question and for being nice enough to say that you've never had to ask men that question, because that itself tells you about the bias, right? So the fact that you never have to, that you don't need to ask them that, is, I think, is telling in itself. But so the short answer is that when it became too stressful for me as a leader of the business, as a mother of two children, and I was looking after my nephew for 4 years, when it became too stressful to keep managing work-life balance, I sold the business, right? And on a more serious note, I think I managed it with the help of mentors. And I think in the audience, whoever is trying to juggle these two hats will have some kind of advisors, some mentors that you reach out to, some champions who support you. But more than that, I think in India, we're really blessed because most of us can rely on the support system of domestic staff, which we don't tend to have overseas. And initially, I was extremely reluctant to get a cook. In fact, in my book, I have a portion called You Can Either Be a Cook or a CEO. And that's what exactly my chairman had told me in the first year, because I would disappear from work because the cook, I didn't have a cook and so on. And I must tell you, that Mr. Thomas told me, look, lower your standards of perfection at home. You can't do both things. So if you want to balance it, you have to make sure that at the home front you delegate. Okay. And when you delegate, you can't demand the same kind of perfection. Otherwise, it's going to drive you crazy. It took me a while to accept that, because a lot of us, I think, are perfectionists at home and therefore at work, and vice versa. But over time, I realized that you can fall into a pattern where you do just enough to keep sane, just enough to keep going, and then you are at the workplace completely focusing on what you have to do. Having said that, I wouldn't have been able to do this if Mr. Thomas was not constantly supporting me. And Ashok, who is the man who told me to become the CEO, he was always there. More than half the time, he was always there. And we always took turns traveling. In fact, I remember the days when my son, the older one, was young. Ashok would travel, come back, put his suitcase down. We had a rule: we would never travel at the same time, also for safety reasons. He would put his suitcase down and I would pick up my bag and I would leave for the airport. So we lived through times like that. But I think, Raviji, in all of this, when we talk about work life balance, I think the women who are in the audience might want to talk about this. And I recently read a book called by Anita Bhogle, very good book. I would recommend it highly, called Equal Yet Different. She also talks about guilt, the guilt that women feel. And I think learning how to deal, it will never go away. I think only an inhuman person would not have any guilt. There's always some residual or vestige of conflict or guilt, however much you have done to take care of the homestead. So what is the kind, the source of guilt is, have I been a perfect parent? In fact, when my kid was in Montessori, I remember the first little report card the poor lad got when he was 4 years old. His Montessori teacher had written, good in this, good in that, shapes, colors, this, that. But in the comment, she wrote, maybe insecure. Mrs. Mom, when he goes home, she's not there when he goes home from work. And till today, those words are kind of etched in my brain, and I call it my bad mother persona. I was a bad mother. And years later, when I would go to his PTA at Bishop Cotton School, the first thing I would do when he was in third and fourth standard, and I was very much more settled in the workplace, was to look for the remarks. Has the teacher picked up on any insecurity in this child? And something, Raviji, the funny thing is, it's not funny. I guess that's the way the world is. I was wired to take 100% of the blame on myself. you know I must have been the one. I should have been. I never thought Ashok should have been at home more. I would never go to Ashok and say, look, why did you not be there? I'm saying, oh God, I wish I had managed my work a little better. So I think guilt is something that is there in all of us. And another lesson very quickly that I learned through this struggle was that when our kids are growing up, it's not enough to talk to them when we have the time to listen, but to be able to listen when they want to talk. And there's a big difference. So I discovered that when my son was leaving school and running out of the gates at 3 p.m., if I was in Boston and it was 3 a.m., I would wake up and call him and say, tell me what happened in your day. And at that time, he would pour out everything. 1 hour later or 2 hours later, when it was 5 and I was up, if I called him, he would have settled down with Cartoon Network or a Lego robot or something, and he would not be interested. But it was important for him that I called when he wanted to talk. And I also noticed, by the way, since we talked about women and this unfair question, I noticed that men were bad at creating a balance. I felt this was their own fault. I'm talking only about my example. They were always, in those days, there were Blackberries. Even on leave, when you send an email, they needn't have answered, but within minutes, you get a response. So my question was, how can you know what's going on in your family when your kids are in the pool and you are on your BlackBerry? I mean, what's the whole point of going away on leave? So I did two things. I think I became more empathetic to the needs of the women in the business, certainly, and their families, because I was a woman myself. So I created maintenance breaks. 9 days in summer, 9 days in winter. We got people to go away on holiday as a family together, and they loved it. They miss it, in fact, now. And secondly, I made sure that people left on time. I said, every day you can't have an emergency that you have to stay. Most of the men would hang around after work, and I'd say, just go home, lights out. If you're working, if you're here afterwards, it doesn't mean you're necessarily working. but that you're probably avoiding your family. I was a little unpopular for all this, but I think it helped families to come together and have some quality time together. So yeah, I think this is it about work life. I had something else to say about India versus the West, but I'll wait to see if you have any more questions.
Yeah, maybe we can pick up on some of these themes during the Q&A in response to audience questions. You could
Yeah,
elaborate on some of this, and it's okay. We are okay on time. We can go a few minutes beyond 5 and then pick up questions after
sure.
that. No, not a problem. Yes, that line in your book from Mr. Thomas, you can either cook or be a CEO. When I read that, it made my blood boil, but now maybe I understand. I couldn't believe that Mr. Thomas, who's like a global professional, would say such a thing. But I understand the context, and maybe he meant it in all the nice ways.
Yes.
But literally speaking, I don't believe that you can either cook or be a CEO. You can do both, but and that shouldn't have been said just to women. It should have been said to anyone he was mentoring, but maybe I don't think he said it to the men he was mentoring, and so on. But those, I don't think we can get into that, and I can't try to read Mr. Thomas's mind and why he said that. We leave that aside. So on that theme, indulge me in for a minute to tell about a story which also struck me when I read it,
Mhm.
which I'm sure you have come across, and most of people in our audience have read it. I'll just quickly reiterate. So we all know Indra Nooyi, who was the CEO of PepsiCo. So she recalls a story in her memoirs and in many interviews she has done, is that when she became the president of president of PepsiCo, before she became the CEO, when she became the president of PepsiCo, she rushed home, and her mother was staying with her in those days. And she shouted, "I've got great news for you." And her mother said, "It can wait. We need you to go out and get some milk first." And so Indra Nooyi went out and got milk for the family. And when she came back, she said she was hopping mad, that I had such great news. I have become the global president of a organization like PepsiCo, and all you are interested in is me getting milk for the family. So she was very mad. And the thing that her mother said to her is, "Let me explain something to you. You may be the president of PepsiCo, but when you step into this house, you are a wife and mother first. Nobody can take that place. So leave that crown in the garage." So that, do you leave, or did you leave the crown in the garage?
I'm glad you picked up on that theme because I can relate to what Indra Nooyi has recounted. And remember, Ravi, in my case, it was not just a CEO in the office and wife and mother at home, but the daughter-in-law of the family that had invested their retirement savings. So you can imagine the dynamics where I had to take over in a difficult situation. So it was much worse. But you know, one thing I realized when you made me think about it, because you know, when you're going through it, you don't necessarily think about it. You may get angry, you may chafe at it. But looking back, I realized it was not a question of having to leave the crown. When I stepped over the threshold of the house, and I think that's the way women are wired, I was mom and wife automatically. You know, it's just the way it is. And there were things that, of course, did upset me. And that was when I was at the workplace and my crown was ignored there, even when I'm at work, you know, in authority, in a position of power, just because of my gender. And I'll give you an example. On I remember some Monday mornings, hectic time at work, review meetings, and I will get a call from a female relative who says, you know, Hema, you have such a great domestic staff set up at home. Can you also get me a maid? So one day I asked, I took the name of a very big CEO, was very popular at the time, a male, and I said, would you have asked him that, you know, he's also related to you? Would you call him and ask him on a Monday morning to find you some help? Why are you doing this to me? So I think it was just that for people to reconcile this thought in their heads that I could do all this at home and then I suddenly become the CEO at work, I think the fact that they couldn't was what was more galling to me. And I think work from home has, you brought this up when we were talking offline, I think. Work from home has made this aspect very complex, you know. When you get out of the house, get into your car, drive to work, you're in a completely different environment and everything is set around you and you are the boss or you're the senior leader, it's very different. But I know I fortunately didn't have to go through this because my life was very different when COVID hit. But I've seen friends and neighbors struggle with the fact that when you're at home, it's even more. Where do you leave the crowd? There's no space, right? What crown are you wearing? There is no space, no sort of distinction or separation. And in Anita's book, she has given, I must ask you to read a set of 7 or 8 things that she finds very practical, including investing in automation and technology, maybe appliances, getting people in the family to help out, carving out chores for everybody, insisting or enforcing a rule of not being disturbed when you're on work related meetings, even though you're in front of them, making sure there is some office, semblance of office furniture, where even if you're working from your bedroom, I think a few of these things help you to keep your sanity and your wits around you in difficult times.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very true. And I was going to come to this how the work from home in the last couple of years has complicated things. Many people, like you were saying earlier, you worked from home even much before COVID struck, but a large number of people have started working from home in the last couple of years. And that's where it becomes even more complicated when the man and the woman both are working at home. And it is kind of assumed that the woman would kind
Yeah.
of walk away from her computer and do the cooking and cleaning and come back while the man working. The man gets the silent corner or the study in the house to work. Woman works in the kitchen or in the at the dining table. All of those little things that are kind of what we call unconscious bias often, but it
Yes.
happens all the time.
Sure.
And your other point also, I can recognize that of not only leaving the crown when you step into the house, but not the crown not being recognized at the office.
Yeah.
That happens. I've seen that in meetings where there are a few men and women, and a woman makes a brilliant point, and the meeting moves on. And 5 minutes later, a man makes the same point, and everyone says, "Oh, that's a brilliant point. Thank you." and,
Absolutely.
and it's just taken as natural. No one kind of makes noise about it. No one notices, or many people don't notice that the point
Yeah.
has been made earlier, but because it was made by a woman, it was kind of ignored. And the whole mansplaining area of where men keep kind of over explaining things, assuming that the women will take time to understand simple things and so on. So
Raviji, can I just, I just wanted to butt in quickly with a couple of stories. I thought, things had moved on when I'd become an independent director. It's interesting that you raised this point and very perceptive of you to have noticed that when a woman makes the point, men don't say anything. So I was there is something on a board when you're an independent director, you have to have a mandatory meeting called meeting of only the independent directors, where you rate the executives and how is the company doing, are you happy with the information you're getting. And at my very first experience, I was there, I was with stalwarts, big guys from big companies, and almost they had retired from those companies, but they were treated as titans, and I was the only woman there. So the moment the doors were closed and we were sitting around the table, and one of them appointed himself the chairperson. I mean, it was just presumed that because he was the oldest and a legend, he is the chairperson. There's no question about what process should we follow, who should become the chair, right? But what was even worse was that the moment we started talking, he looks at me and says, Hema, will you take notes? And I was, you can imagine, I was, forgive my French, but I was so pissed off. I finished, I said, maybe we can all make mental notes of what's going on. But then I said, to hell with it, somebody has to take notes. So I emailed everybody. But I called up my HR mentor, whom I still talk to when I've got steam coming out of my ears. And I said, this is what he assumed, I'm the female, so I'm the scribe. Not even the scribe, I'm the secretary. And I said, how could he assume that? I'm on par with him. I'm sitting there as an independent director. And I said, I'm going to quit. I'm going to, I wrote to the MD, who's a friend of mine, and I said, I can't deal with guys like this. So, my coach said, why don't you take a step back? The easiest thing to do is to walk away, right? But why don't you? It's a little bit like Sheryl Sandberg. He said, why don't you stick your heels in and don't check out so early? let them know, you train them on what they should do. And I think that was very valuable advice, because in a quiet moment once I gave that person that feedback, and he said, really, did I do that? Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it, you know. So I think it's sometimes it can be unconscious, and for me to have walked away from that maybe would have been an irretrievable situation. I'm glad I didn't do that. There are many other stories around independent directors, but for another day.
Yeah, I think we will get to questions, but just on this thing of bias, the other thing that rankles with me, and maybe you can comment on that briefly, is I think we use this word unconscious bias as a get out of jail free card. And men say, oh, I didn't realize I was doing this. It was unconscious bias, as if unconscious bias is conscionable,
Forgivable.
is forgivable, and it's not my fault. It's
Yes,
unconscious, not my fault.
exactly.
But I think we need to make people aware that bias, unconscious, conscious, virulent, minor, everything has to be fixed. It's not that it's unconscious, so we live with it. Okay, I think some of other things that we haven't been able to discuss, I think might come up in the questions. So
Sure.
we move on to questions. So Momita, you will take some questions now.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Hema, for such an interesting conversation. I've got some really valuable advice there. So we have a lot of interested audience members who would like to ask you questions. So first up, I would like to request Professor Sonal Yadav. She had a question for you. So if you could come on camera and ask.
Hi, thank you, Hemaji, for that interesting story. Although you have partially answered my question, you are a very caring boss. So my question was about, like, when organization grow, there are conflicts, there's difference of opinion. How do you manage to satisfy each and every employee, and how do you keep them motivated? And you have like said, very interestingly that how do you do that? But following question is that when there's so many, employees in the organization, as you know, there are very stringent labor laws. So how and somewhere, there's some 10% of the laborers who are not happy, and there are situation of strikes and union. This is the time, like, before reforms, where labor union presence of labor union was there. So at that time, how did you deal with that? And also, like, I am very interested to know whether what is the gender ratio in your organization? How many women employees are there? Thank you.
Okay, as you know, Sonal, we are referring to Conserve, which I sold to Schneider 12 years ago. So any data I give you is actually refers to the time before 2010. But let me answer the second part of your question about the ratio. We, on the shop floor, which is actually a very tough area to get women into, we had nearly 50% women. And there was a historical reason, because we started off with, printed circuit boards and handheld soldering, etc., which my father-in-law had started. And we found that women were very good at that. They had delicate hands, they were good at it. As surface mount technology and all that came, of course, unfortunately, we couldn't increase the jobs, but we kept that ratio. I'm happy and proud to say we helped to upskill the women, but we kept that ratio of 50%, which is commendable. In the in the senior leadership, because I was the woman CEO, I of course made sure that the head of marketing, the head of HR, there were lots of positions except in sales, because this was a very hardcore sales job. I only once had a woman regional manager in the south. We had more men than women in the sales engineering, at the middle levels.
Yeah.
I'd say overall we were at 33% women overall.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And your first question was about unions, right? What did I
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, labor union, labor laws, very
There's a
stringent
whole,
labor laws.
yeah. So there's a whole story about how I prevented the formation of a politically motivated union, because the employees within the company didn't want a union, but there was somebody threatening them from the outside that he would rape the women and chop off the limbs of men if they didn't agree to come up with a memorandum because they wanted to get into the company, right? So there's a whole very interesting story, not in the case study, but in the book about how I broke the back of that because I knew that it was politically motivated. Um, to answer your question, it was very difficult to be, you couldn't be demanding, you had to find ways because there are laws which protect certain communities. You can't be seen to be offending the sensibilities of a particular community. It's a non-bailable. I almost got arrested on a non-bailable offense because all it needed was for this guy who was being politically instigated. All he had to do was to go to the local cop station and say, this managing director insulted my community. Nobody would ask me for defense. Okay. Right. So I must tell you that it was a tough time, but because the culture that we had in the company was very endearing and we had very open channels of communication. People knew they could walk in and say what they liked. That helped to get some of the steam out. And but when it came to performance, we were very clear. We documented everything. The law doesn't mean that you have to accept shoddy work or dishonest work. You just have to be, you cannot be seen as being, what do you call, imperious or you can't sack people without reason. That's all it says. So if you can document and you have a good trail, of course, you're within your rights to, you have to do inquiry, investigation, you follow all the steps. But you have to be careful in this country.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal. Next up, if Shalini Radhakrishnan, if you could come on camera and ask your question, please.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Hi. Hi, Shalini.
Ma'am, my question was, since we are aspiring to become future managers, ma'am, at times during stressful situation, we doubt our capabilities. Means sometimes we get into such circumstances where we know we are capable, but somehow it leads us to self-doubting. So, ma'am, and I'm sure when we right now we are in MBA program, but 2 years down the line we will be working in any company, and corporate offices are very hectic. So we'll be dealing with a lot of hectic schedules and so much work. So, ma'am, how to tackle that situation? How to deal with self-doubt which arises at times?
Wonderful question. And Shalini, I must tell you, I'm not sure that I've ever been asked that question by a man. So one of the things that we women again are wired, it's the conditioning, the social norms we have, not only in this country, everywhere, is that we are always taught to, second guess ourselves. It is a product of, I think centuries of conditioning. So I picked up this very good lesson from this book I have been referring to, Equal Yet Different by Anita Bhogle. You know what she says, and I really like the thought. Just like, see, we can criticize men for a whole bunch of things, that this unconscious bias and all that. But look at all the things that they have, which we could emulate. If you think that the men around you, whether they're your peers, your father, brother, partner, boyfriend, somebody is confident, find out why. What makes you, I think it is in Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, that she says that men will say they are prepared when they're 70% prepared, and the women say that only when they're 120% prepared. That's the difference because of the self-doubt angle. So follow some men and talk to them and say, hey, what makes you come across as so confident, yaar? Because I know you don't know the answer, I know the answer. Where does your confidence come from? So you just have to drop that self-doubt. You have to start believing in yourself. Because if you don't believe in yourself, how will you get others to believe in you? I think that's the thought that you need to keep.
Absolutely, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shalini. And that's quite very valuable advice to all future female leaders. Thank you, Emma. Next, we have a question from Professor Pallavi Vyas. So Pallavi, if you could ask your question.
Hi, thanks so much for this inspiring talk. So I'm a professor at Ahmedabad University, and I moved back from the States after working there for a large number of years. So one thing that's really stuck out for me is the the constant subliminal patriarchy that I'm facing from men and women and even students, right? A student will, I say something, he doesn't understand it and has said to me, ma'am, you're wrong, and I'm sure he would not have the audacity to say that to a male professor, and I'm like, I reacted very aggressively at that point, and I said, no, your question should not be, ma'am, you're wrong. It should be, ma'am, I don't understand what you're saying. Could you repeat yourself? And he slammed me in my evaluation right now. He kind of like, he said, I'm going to take revenge. I could see, where the revenge was coming from, right? And even with my, colleagues, I've been told that, because I have agency, I have voice, right? So I speak my mind, and you speak too much, right? I'm the aggressive person in the room, right? Automatically, because I have an opinion. Like, I'm not saying that mine is the only opinion, but I have an opinion, right? And that's what we're training our children to do, right?
Absolutely.
That's the whole point of being at a liberal arts education, right? And then you want your faculty to sit, to shut up and sit down, right? You know what I mean? So it's like, but it's like 4 years now, it's getting to me. Like, I'm like, I can't believe that I'm always fighting, right? Like, it feels like a constant fight because I'm always being doubted, right? Obviously not by everybody. It's a great job. I'm not complaining in general, but I'm saying you see that that it's going on at some level and not intentionally, right? Because it's like years of programming of people who are in your environment, who have kind of grown up in a patriarchal environment, right? So how do you not let it get under your skin? Because I am like ready to constantly shoot.
I'll tell you. I said this in, in 2005, I think, and I saw the same advice in Anita's book, and I realized that nothing has changed in the last 15 years. And I'll tell you the answer to your problem. Be thick-skinned.
How?
Develop it. Develop a thick skin, because if in a moment of reflection, you will realize that you know in your heart that this behavior of people around you reflects more on them than on you. The moment you allow it to get to you, into your psyche, it means you think it's reflecting on you, but it's not. They are behaving that way because of XYZ reasons. We don't even want to defend them or make excuses for them by saying that it's social conditioning. It is completely buffoonish behavior, if you ask me. They don't need to behave like that, whether it's a student, a colleague, or anybody, man or woman. But I think if you're thick-skinned and it bounces off you like water off a duck's back, after some time, the joy they get of getting a rise out of you is going to go away. When I was young, I was very aggressive. I still am in certain situations. But I think over time, I've realized, I picked up on a quote from the Dalai Lama. He said, don't let the behavior of others destroy your inner peace. And I love that because it showed you that you have agency and you have control over what you feel inside you. Don't let anybody take that away from you. I don't want to sound like a Swamiji, but that's what I believe in.
No, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks.
Pallavi, just a quick one. The next time you have a student like this, a male trying to show you up just because you're a woman, I think you should just take a quick time out and have a debate in the class, a conversation, and say, let's stop for a moment and just go over what just happened here. You need a certain kind of environment to be able to do that. So it's easy for me to tell you, but I don't know if it can be done. But get the girls and the guys, not this particular person, get the rest of them to, role play or talk through what they saw happening. And maybe just that interaction, somebody else saying and doing and not you, you might be able to get a slightly distant perspective and figure out a slightly different approach.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Maybe you shouldn't react at that moment.
Yeah, I didn't want to. It just came out because I was, again, like, it's like it's all constantly coming at you, right? So thank you for that, because I would want to do something different in the future.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for being honest about what you go through. Must be tough.
Thanks.
Thank you, Pallavi. Our final question is from Dr. Meeta Dixit. So if you would like to come on camera and ask your question.
Hema, that has been a very interesting conversation and your story, and very encouraging. I found it very interesting from the family business point of view, because I work with families as a family business advisor. My question was going back a little back, and if you had to think about your nephews and cousins who separated out at some point, and that was obviously in the family, then there is a rift. Suppose if they were all working together, then how would you have professionalized? Because you and your husband working together under the chairmanship of your father-in-law also would be a simple structure of the family, where family dynamics don't play much role, or say conflicting role. But if there was cousins consortium also, then you think how, I mean, it's a not the real question, but it's imaginary, but you must have come across some such tensions in
Meeta, the very prospect of doing that, of working with a bunch of these people who are so unethical, and yet they used to go to IIM Ahmedabad to talk about ethics, got my goat so much that I went to the extent of bringing about the termination of that contract, although I was a new entrant and just the daughter-in-law. So that's the answer to your question. I couldn't even, in my dreams or my worst nightmares, see us working under people like that. I would be willing to just be on the street, but I would not be able to work. How can you professionalize when you're dealing with unprofessionals?
One more question in addition to this is when you say professionalizing roles of the family members in your family, what exactly would be different than non-family members or non-family leaders working in the business, and they having their jobs and KRAs and KPIs and performance evaluation? So do you think that the family members also need to go through that professional course of
yeah, they have to earn their place. And if you look at the family constitutions that very large families now follow, I think TVS, for example, is a case in point. So is Carborundum Universal. In fact, they put the family more through the ringer and haul them over the coals to make sure that they earn their place, and not simply by birth into the family. I think that's very important for acceptance by the professionals. Otherwise, it's a race to the bottom. If you bring in people at the top just because they are family.
Do you plan to do that for your younger generation also? They plan to join the business?
No, I sold my business in 2010 to Schneider Electric.
But the younger generation would be connected anyway in the business?
No.
This business?
I don't have, no.
Entrepreneur? Okay.
I'm now just an author and a mentor. I don't have a family business.
It says that out of 100 businesses, only 3 businesses, they live till the 3rd generation. Yeah. And most businesses, they close down or change hands.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Okay, this conversation is bringing up a lot more questions. So we have one more person who would like to ask a question. Apurva Agarwal, if you could come on camera and ask your question.
Sure. Hi. So I have mentorship experience from men and women, and I feel like one difference that I've noticed is that the men who I get mentorship from, whether this is a manager or somebody that I know personally, they don't like talking about emotions at work. They don't like they want to pretend like emotions don't exist. And because my current manager is also a man, I mean, he's professionally achieved a lot, but I feel like when you work at a startup or when you work in a stressful work environment, you have to be willing to account for that and also manage that. And I've seen that they're not able to give me a lot of advice or coaching on how to handle that, because I feel like that's part of being a leader, being able to process or manage, like you said, developing a thick skin or managing certain situations. So did you have a similar experience, and what advice would you give to somebody who's being mentored by someone who doesn't want to acknowledge the existence of emotions. And they usually look at it as, I guess, a little bit of a sexist thing, because they say, like it's something women would do, being emotional at work.
My short answer to you, Apurva, get a better mentor. Because if this mentor, this man, has professionally excelled in what he's doing, he has obviously dealt with emotions at work, knows how to deal with it. He can't have been, numbers, rah, rah, rah all the time. Unless he didn't stick around for too long, and left a mess in his wake. I don't know. But if he's not willing to talk about it, and it means that a big chunk of the value addition that you should be getting, you're not getting. So my advice to you would be to look for somebody who would look at work as a 360 whole, right? There is EQ, IQ, SQ, all kinds of Qs come into play. So how can you not talk about emotions? And to answer your second question, I have not had that experience because, as you know, I have had R.R. Nair as my mentor. And RR was all about psychological contract and all about the touchy-feely, the intangibles that make people work. I think what you are getting, see, there's a difference between mentoring and coaching. The mentor usually helps you to excel at work. So listen to this person and figure out how you can do what he has done in the workplace. What are the nuts and bolts of succeeding at work? When it comes to the rest of it, how am I feeling? How am I dealing with relationships? You probably need to go to a coach who will hold up a mirror and make you reflect on your own emotions and your interpersonal relations. That need not necessarily come from your mentor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Apurva. Thank you for that question. We've come to the end of the session, so I would ask Ravi to share his concluding comments on the session.
Can I just take? I just have to tell the audience this story,
Sure.
And I'll make it very brief. In 2007, I was on a flight back from the US, and I was sitting next to the IT director of Deutsche Bank in Germany. She was based in Germany. And we were talking about our life stories. She said, how many children do you have? I said, 2. She said, I also have 2, but I've had to take a break from my career because the German government and society doesn't encourage women who have had 1 or 2 children to work, to continue working. In fact, we are given tax breaks, one for each child. And the more children you have, the more tax breaks you get. And they encourage you to stay at home for 3 years. So I said, what happens when you come back to work? So she says, your seniority is gone. You feel outdated. You sometimes start 2 rungs below. And, the bus you've missed the bus. So she said they have a word in Germany for this neglectful mother. Like if you give up your kids and come to work, they call it Raven mother or Rabenmutter in German. And I was just thinking as I was researching for today, okay, that happened in 2007. Let's see what's on today. So when I Googled, the first thing that hit me when I Googled Crow Mother was in 2021, a few months ago, when Angela Merkel was supposed to step down as chancellor and the candidates were announced, there was one woman who had 2 young children who was announced as a candidate. And guess what the German mainstream media said? How will she reconcile chancellery and 2 children at home? And I was thinking, my goodness, we are so lucky that in India, when we announce XYZ has become the woman CEO, the CEO of so-and-so corporation, thank God, we don't have business standards saying, how is she going to manage her kids? So, Raviji, I was just saying that the reason I wanted to say this was it helps sometimes. And I've got stories in USA, in Canada, and then I come back and I look at what we have here. I think we still have a lot to be thankful for. There's lots of work to be done. And I just want to give my concluding note of optimism. I think my daughter, who is 18, is going to see a very different world. And you know why? Because she is going to stand up for herself. She's going to speak for herself. She is going to demand and get her place under the sun. That's what I believe.
Wow. Okay. So Momita had handed it back to me for my concluding remarks, but I can't top that. That was the, so I won't want to spoil that moment of such great advice that you are concluded on. So no concluding remark from me. But we are past our time, but one more thing, you referred us to this excellent book by Anita Bhogle. Any other book or any other media that comes to your mind which our audience should look up?
Yeah, the first one is a book called Mother's Work by Rebecca Mathias. She's amazing because she has a chapter summary at each end, at the end of each chapter. Rebecca Mathias. She ran a $500 million company raising 3 children, and she was so successful. Her husband, the architect husband, and his parents left whatever they were doing to join her business. The second one is called Glass Half Broken by Colleen, I think it's Ammerman. I can email you the exact name. But it basically shows in the US, in some things like the law, architecture, people are worse off than we are in India. I can tell you that much. So it gave me a little hope when I read that book. The other one is called Invisible Women, which basically shows how statistically a lot of data is put together completely masking women and their achievements. There is a whole fat book. It's just called Invisible Women. We are not there in the numbers at all. So if you're not there even as a reference point, then any delta that's taking place also cannot be reflected. And yeah, the fourth, of course, is Equally Yet Different by Bhogle.
And the fifth is your book by.
Yes, absolutely. I would put it at number 1.
Okay, thank you so much. This has
Pleasure.
been great. And as I said, we will hopefully see you at the university at some time in the near future, and we'll continue the conversation. And thank you to our audience for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. And we'll see you all again next Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.